Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. So, welcome to our first official episode of Inside the Rookery. Yay! Big cheer. We've been really happy this week by all the support everyone's shown, and I don't just mean on the Patreon financially, because we understand that money is not everything, and everyone doesn't have money. But also your kind words, your excitement, joining us on the Discord, and your feedback on other social media. It's really meant a huge amount to us as a little company starting out in the world. So today I'm joined by Andy Law and Andy Leask of The Rookery, and Steve Savile, who in his own words is the best-selling writer you've never heard of. Later on in the stream, we'll be announcing a little something for early Patreons.
Yes, we will.
But for now, join us as we go inside the Rookery and talk about building better worlds with Steve and the other Rooks. As always, please put your comments in the chat and ask questions. Why are you shaking your head?
Building better books.
Building better books, sorry.
Roll my eyes.
I was doing so well. I was so excited.
That's what makes it fun. All right, where are we beginning then?
Where are we beginning?
Don't ask me.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So first of all, we've got a question from Smiling Tom, who asks,
Hi, Smiling Tom.
hey, who has pre-submitted. Smiling Tom asks, oops, sorry about this, just like technical hitches. Was just wondering, because I guess that you have a ton of versions going on, how do you collate and handle the editing work and keeping track of versions from a joint task like this? So quite a structural question there.
Certainly is.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it very much depends, because part of what I do is just me getting to make crap up for myself. And the other part is I work with a team like yourselves. And there, Google Drive is an absolute savior.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that, like if we talk about the Viking game, the mobile phone game I'm writing, I've had 5 colleagues who've come and gone, who are co-writers, who've been let go along the way. I've had, I think, about 20 or 30 on-staff guys in Shanghai working. So, every folder we've got has got multiple versions, multiple languages. And, it goes like version 1, version 1.01, version 1.011. And every time we make an amendment, we're having to change the file with some very logical and obvious structure. Because what I used to do was write finished version, edited version, absolutely final version, completely final, been edited, been to the publisher and back version, and it just got harder and harder to go shit, because then you couldn't trust the dates on it either, because every time you opened the folder, it's last opened on such, it's like, is this the real one? So it was developing quite an elaborate numerical structure that said, if you touch it, you change it. And everybody who goes into it has to change, so we can obviously see what the most recent is, but also keep all of the old stuff, because you're going to delete shit you want to bring back. You're going to go, no, that was a bad idea. We shouldn't have gone down that avenue. Let's revert. And like, if we talk about the mobile phone game, it's currently 200 chapters. Each chapter is about 1,500 to 3,000 words. So you're looking at about 500,000 words worth of story and world that is all linked, interlinked, dependent upon this action or that action. You change that, this has to change. So it really is, it's almost like a mathematical balancing act.
Yeah.
I shall keep mine brief. Google Drive is brilliant, as is Google Docs, because you not only have a very easy shared space that everybody can access immediately, but Google itself saves versions all the way back. Yeah. So if you change everything, or if all the comments that were on an old document were resolved, you can just go back and bring them back up again, take a look at what happened in the past. So for shared projects, shared spaces like Google, and there are other shared spaces too, are great. However, depending upon the size of your company and how many people you have working on a particular job, you might find that other platforms work better. Like, for example, we've recently and somewhat bizarrely shifted to Word of all things, because the Word styles import really easily into InDesign. Really easily, and it makes the import into InDesign when we're laying out the final books really easy, because you can just go press a button, and it just furls out across InDesign, with all of the styles and all the necessary headers already in place, meaning on the layout side things suddenly speed up. However, you lose to a degree the functionality that you get from your online space. So I'll stop there so that Andy can. That's why I said to a degree.
Yeah,
because I know he's going to come in and say.
So, as has come up on the podcast before, like in my other life as a teacher, I'm a bit of a Microsoft shill, or technically I'm a Microsoft Innovative Educator Expert. That's what I am.
Of course you are.
And yeah, like a lot of the functionality that we used to get from Google Drive, we can also get from Word Online. That does require kind of like buy-in and other kind of like setup and stuff like that we're kind of looking at and kind of involving. But I think one of the things that is quite interesting, and Andy, I perhaps interrupted you before you could get to it, but is a process that every now and then we very intentionally take things offline. So at a certain point in the process, when we've had a lot of input, and we're all very collaborative. So when something's being written, the input that's coming in is not just from other writers, but Mark comes in with ideas as well, and you know we're all kind of talking and sharing ideas. But it comes at a certain point, there's too many voices, and it just needs to be taken offline. And whoever's either finishing the writing or doing the editing or doing the production pass needs it just on their own without any more input until it's kind of through that stage. So.
Yeah, UK 6SM says Google Drive is fantastic for projects with lots of often too many clients and editors. Oh, and Roderick says he's always wondered what that stood for on Twitter, Andy Leask, but I was too afraid to ask.
Well, now you know.
There are some interesting things in the chat guessing our names and occupations, which we might come to later if we get through the questions. So I look forward to that.
I don't know if I do.
So Tarantis Master asks, how much do you concern yourself with whether your work is unique to you? Do you research other writing to make sure you aren't repeating someone else?
Do I start?
You want to go on that one? Yeah, go for it. We all know what the answer is. Because I have the same strong views.
Just checking, because, you know, I will swear accidentally.
We're grown ups.
Yeah. Basically, I like to believe that I am one brilliant motherfucker. Right? Everything I do is gold. Ish. I come in with the attitude that I've been doing this now. Christ, I sold my first thing in 1991. So, you know, I'm way past. Yeah, purist green, indeed. I've been, if I tried to, or if I worried about what other people were doing, I would get nowhere, because there are hundreds of thousands of other people doing stuff. And let's be absolutely honest, originality of idea doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's not the idea, it's the execution of the idea. And that's why I am still in a job, right? 30 years later. You have to be able to execute the ideas as well as possible, and strive to get better every time you do it. So every time you sit down, write better than you wrote before. The idea can be stretched, can be pushed, can be changed, can be inverted. You can sit there and think, okay, I want a farm boy. You know, the oldest story in the book. You know, if you couldn't make it work, you wouldn't have that Kevin Hearn and Delia Dawson series, which completely inverts the farm boy trope and is hilarious. It all just comes down to your trusting your uniqueness, trusting your gift, your graft, your effort, and saying, you know what, I have original ideas. I will spark original ideas, and I will polish my ideas to the best that I can make my ideas so they are me. because nobody else is going to write exactly what I write, how I write. They may write a similar thing. You know, I mean, for Games Workshop, I did the vampire counts and stuff. I mean, sitting down and doing that, I literally had a list of every single vampire cliche I wanted to hit. I literally thought, I'm going to do one set of vampire books in my life. Have fun by literally doing every single one, every cliche you can do, because when you put it together and you execute it, it'll still be completely different. And I think if as creatives, if we sat there every day and thought, maybe I should just check what Bob's doing, you know, Matt Forbeck, what's he up to now? Or maybe I'm going to worry about Andy, what's Andy up to now with Warhammer stuff, etc. You know, or whoever, you know, I would be, he's miming it, but yeah, flapping around, kicking, treading water, going, I'm getting nowhere ever. It's, you've just got to get to a point where you trust yourself and know that, you know, what you do is you.
Here's an awkward one. My musician brother accidentally plagiarized Mozart for his composition recital. Everyone thought it was a brilliant tongue-in-cheek move. He was absolutely gassed because he didn't realize. He did it until others pointed out. We've all been there, plagiarizing Mozart. I guess a lot of teenagers start by writing fan fiction.
Yes.
You know, and that is a perfectly valid way to start expressing yourself. You know, you can publish that online, you can hone your craft, you can like geek out with other people who love those worlds, and ultimately one day you can spread your wings beyond that, and you've got all that practice behind you in a style that it's almost like it's like painters, right? You can't really do impressionism until you've mastered the basics of, I don't know, life drawing. You know, you have to have the basics.
Spoken like an artist. Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. On my side, I'm going to pick up something that Graham said to me several times, because he's not here today. Graham often gets people, and I have often in a similar situation when I was doing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4, you would often get people saying, "Hi, I have written X, Y, or Z. Do you mind having a look over it?" To which my response was almost always, no. And it wasn't just because I didn't have the time, although I didn't. And it wasn't just because I was mean and horrible. It's because I don't want other people's ideas influencing my brain. I want my brain to be coming up with its own genius. And on top of that as well, if on the unlikely situation, I had this extraordinary ideas halfway through, someone gets in contact with me and says, "Hey, Andy, take a look at this." I look at it and it's very similar to mine. Suddenly I'm the one that's being accused of plagiarism. So do I go out there and look at what other people are doing? Almost never. In fact, never. I'm not worried about it, because to worry about it is to get yourself into exactly the flap that Steve was saying. You're just looking around. You're not actually pinning anything down that's on the screen in front of you, and you're not refining what's in front of you without fear. If you're trying to avoid and get away from other people's work, you're often stymieing your own creativity. And it's fine to accidentally have hit upon somebody else's, particularly because through the process of that polishing, it's going to turn into something completely new anyway. I have rarely found a piece of work that has come out at the end the same as when it began.
And I've got like very briefly like one like very specific inverse of that, which is parody and satire, at which point we will actively seek out what somebody's doing in order to parody and satirize it. But that I think is the one exception.
Do you know, I was actually going to ask you about that, Andy. Interestingly, great minds think alike. We'll just leave that saying there. Tarantus Master asks, do you consider that part of the playtesting or editing process? I've written adventures for my group that feature some NPCs that are part of an IP. I'm rewriting the adventure for community publication, eliminating IP references, but I'm also trying to be mindful of narrative elements that are familiar to the IP holders. When we were working on Wifrit 4 together, it was kind of a competition, wasn't it, to see who could get the most deep cut reference, but that people would still get. And we found people like were getting them like weeks and weeks, months and months after they were published, and some haven't been got. So So what's the borderline, and what do you draw your inspiration from for those references? Because you are the king of those.
Yeah, I mean, there are. If you're an Easter egg hunter out there are literally dozens that, as far as I'm aware, people haven't noticed yet in the core book, and even more so in the Guide to Uberstrike. Actually, I think like it's hard. I mean, a lot of it is just I am a voracious consumer of all forms of media, right? Like I love movies, I love TV, I love music, I love obviously books and plays and things, and so whenever I'm writing a scenario and I'm coming up with something that is my own idea, and as you know, that way, as Steve says, with that confident belief that everything I'm writing is gold, you can't help but every now and then feel that little bit of resonance, right? So one of the obvious ones I think it's in Uberstrike, is there's a Pulp Fiction reference, and it's a kind of playing on the pumpkin and honey bunny scene, sort of at the start of Pulp Fiction, and that to me, like it just landed on a plate. I was an adventure hook for being in a bar. And you wanted something. I wanted something that was going to kind of force the PCs to either stay quiet and allow something awful to happen, or get involved and potentially risk themselves or make the situation worse. Because for me, all these good hooks and adventures come from putting people in a dilemma, and they have to make a choice. And as soon as I'm doing that in a bar, immediately my brain goes, oh, like at the start of Pulp Fiction, where you had kind of Jules and Vincent there, and so therefore, it being Warhammer, all you need to do is make the names German and ta-da. But it's that kind of thing. It's when I'm writing something, like it almost never begins from the point of putting a reference in, right? Because it tends to begin from I'm doing something, and then it sparks a remembrance to me of something else. There is one exception to, in one of our future products, there is a deep cut reference that is going in come hell or high water, and the reference absolutely came first, and it's terrible, but I've thought of it and I'm putting it in, and I will let people know when it's out, and they can try and guess.
Of course, you might consider part of the playtest process would be your playtesters to tell you if something was derivative, but personally I would be pretty mortified if that had happened, if it had got through a writer, a bunch of editors, before it got to the playtesters. So what we would hope the playtesters would be like is, oh, I can see that derivation, but that's clever. Not having your playtesters come back and be like, yeah, we played this before in 2004.
Just loosely on that one as well. I have done
lots of people's work in
playtests, and that just never happens. It's never ever happened, because once it, as you say, has gone through the process, you always create something unique. And it may be relatively repetitive at the beginning, but by the time it's been polished and it's gone through everything, if it's still that, whoever's responsible for creating it deserves a quick, swift slap. I've had quite a few adventures, for example, land on my lap, which were very much, we start in a bar, we meet some people, we go off, we kill a bad guy, the end. And that is never what I want to be releasing. So that's a part where you sit down with the author and you have a chat and you say, right, what can we do to try and turn this into something that is sparkling? You want that polish to shine right through to the very end. And by the time you've reached the end product and it's hit playtesting, it's always sparkling to a degree. And then after playtesting, it will hopefully be polished and sparkly. Hopefully.
Next question. Totsuzumi Yukimi asks, sorry if I've pronounced that wrong, I do not speak Japanese. Could we also learn about how to get physically better made books? Is that within the scope of the topic?
Yeah, I'll answer this one super quickly. How to get physically better made books is to have yourself people who are buying the books and working with the printers pay more attention and bluntly spend a bit more money. An awful lot of books which are on the top end of the market being sold by the largest publishers use awful paper, truly awful paper. And I open them up and I'm like, why? And there's a real reason why. It's because it was cheaper. We are currently going through the process, for example, of organizing our first print runs. And we're not doing that because, as far as we're concerned, we're creating boutique pieces of awesome. Mm-hmm. And that's all we want to do, because that's who we are. We want to create something that we're proud of, not just to give to other people, but to have for ourselves. We want to be able to pull it off the shelf and go, we made that. That's great. That's right. And that's what it boils down to. Yeah, exactly. That. And we want to be proud. So how do you get physically better made books? The answer is simple. You spend the money to get physically better made books. And you make sure that when you actually deal with the printer and the proofs come through, that they do match your expectations. Too many people don't care.
I have to tell you something. So my first my first ever translation, Warhammer, was Russian hardcover, really nice, but the paper was toilet paper, right? So I put it on the shelf and left it, thought nothing about it, picked it up about 4 years later, and the ink had disappeared. So the book was basically empty. I'm like, holy shit.
Oh, there's a plot hook in that.
I know.
Write it down.
All the words of the book had just disappeared. I'm like, okay, yeah.
Oh, I'm liking that.
It was so cheap.
That is cheap.
Do you remember the first book that you ever had something published in that was just your own and getting that in your hands?
Yeah, I mean, it was. This is really bizarre. It was 1997. It came out. Andy knows my publication story. Long story short, basically, I sold stuff, the company folded. I sold stuff, the company folded. I sold stuff, the company folded. And I felt like a pariah. So 1997, Dorling Kindersley have the rights to do the kids' versions of Return of the Jedi. And because I'd done a bunch of shit for them that had not come out because the line had been cancelled, or a guide to the internet that was going to be published 18 months later in 1994, again, not great. They said, would you like to write the kids' adaptation for the English audience of Return of the Jedi? And I'm like, yeah, that 100%. So then the first actual book, just mine with my name on it, was a Star Wars book, and the feeling was absolutely insane. I mean, even then, it's before the prequels, it's before all the other stuff. They're just coming for the re-releases. The bandwagon isn't what it is now. The hype isn't what it is, but it felt like such a part of my youthful soul. What got me into it. Feeling, opening that box the first time was just like, oh, that's lovely. And it was genuinely very similar with the first Warhammer novel, the first mass market paperback, taking it out of the wrapper, looking at it. And then I'm weird. I don't know what you're like, but that's it. I take it out, I look at it, I go, oh, that's lovely. Thunk. And I never look at it again. Yeah. I have friends who will sit and read the books after they've come out. I'm like, not a prayer. I'll find a typo. I'll find a sentence I don't like. I'll find something that I go, no. So, I've read it 15 times at that point anyway. I never want to look at it again. But that first thing, looking at that first thing, it's wonderful.
And just to go back to the question a little bit, so from my experience and what I've observed, the thing for me that often elevates a book from looking amateurish to looking really good, like really physically, you open it and it looks beautiful, is actually the layout. Like layout is key in an RPG
when it comes to
book.
Roleplay books.
Yeah, for
absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely.
It's kind of the thing that people forget. So like you've got your writing, you've got beautiful art, you've poured over every word, and then layout. Like I think layout is a really underappreciated part of TTRPG design, personally.
Agreed, particularly because so many role-playing games use exactly the same layout. They pretend that they don't, but it's just the 2-column layout with torn images slapped onto the page. It's the same loose expression of how a TTRPG should be expressed again and again and again. To go back to the little side quest you did, I'd like to drop a little one in this one as well. I think the book that blew me away most out of all the ones I'd done was when I received the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition version of the Tome of Salvation from Japan. Now, I've been dealing with hobby games at that point, helping them sort some articles out. And they said, we've got some books here with your name in it. Do you want to see them? And I was like, yeah, that'd be great. So they sent loads over. And opened them up, and it was the most odd experience, because it wasn't just my work, of which there was loads of it through. It was in such a foreign, alien language, yet it was still something I intrinsically understood all the way through, because it was my words. And seeing it, particularly given there was lots of little bits of English spread through it too, it just blew me away. It was gorgeous and weird and small, and a completely different experience as a reader. But yeah, blew me away. I just sat back and went, wow. Look at this. That I did that on the other side of the world. Wow.
It's interesting. I mean, I wonder if Lindsay's the same as me. Like, because for both of us, the first things that we saw kind of like printed as books were like relatively late in life, and not like, for both of us, we had like another career that was our main job, and this was an extra thing. And certainly for me, like, it was an unexpected thing, right time, right place. Kind of opportunity came up, and there it was. But it felt particularly surreal, I think, for me. Even though I think if I remember correctly, I got the physical copy of Woofrit before I got the physical copy of a textbook that I actually contributed to for National 5 English, despite the fact that I finished my copy for that like 2 and a bit years earlier or something. It just took a very long time for that process to kind of go through. But
so next, this is the last of the pre-submitted ones. So Kilishandra asks, how do you organize plotting for a multi-threaded adventure, both in terms of the planning and the execution? And does the final work ever resemble the plan?
I love that.
Also,
little
while you
aspect.
think about that, there is nothing like a new book smell when you get that parcel.
Oh, it's like new game smell as well. There's nothing quite that compares, particularly when it's your own one. I can't explain. You open it up and you're like, oh, beautiful. Does anyone want to jump on this one first? I'll jump on it then. Okay, so this one for me, in fact, no, I'll let somebody else jump on this, because I'll jump on it on the after parts after they've had all the writing put in place, because I'm often receiving in my job somebody else's work. So I will discuss with an author, if we go through the process right at the very beginning with the pitch, exactly what let's say a multi-threaded adventure is going to do. And you tend to find that at the pitch level at the very beginning, that all the multi-level threads of said adventure are at most a paragraph's worth for each. And the complexity that might be involved with doing this piece of work is not readily apparent. And sometimes that requires a little bit of work with the author at the beginning to make sure that both they understand what they're letting themselves in for. Because if you've only got, say, 40k to 80k worth of words to tell this exceedingly complicated story, that you want to ensure that all players can experience the maximum amount of, so you don't have wasted words inside your printed book. That can sometimes take a little bit of work before we even start coming to the actual how we're going to put it together inside the book, just to make sure that we've got it right. So I go from that part where we pitch it to the author, and the author goes, yeah, I can do this, it's not a problem, to the author now taking over.
And well, I mean, like for me, obviously, initially a lot of the stuff I was writing for Warhammer wasn't really adventures. It was relatively recently that I actually started kind of planning out multi-threaded adventures, and particularly like for the first one that I did, which we have announced the name, haven't we, Andy? I can say that.
Yes, we have.
So for What Rides Beneath, which has
that's well out.
Yeah, good. I thought it was. So yeah, but when I was, I'm totally paranoid. I'm going to do Tom Holland and spoil something. So, yeah, when I was first planning that one, like that was very interesting, because I there were certain elements that were absolutely solidly in place at the start and have survived almost unchanged to the very end. And then around that, there's stuff that is so radically different. And a lot of that is just because of ideas that came up during the writing and planning process, or through other products getting made, because we kind of wrote What Rides Beneath, and then actually we wrote Ship of Fools, and in light of that, that's then changed some kind of things later. And the whole thing has kind of evolved. But yeah, I don't think, in the same way that no plan survives first contact with the enemy, I think no plan survives first contact with the writing, and I think that's absolutely fine. So yeah.
Before we pass over to Steve, I've got one extra little bit here as well. Role-playing writing is quite different to book writing, where with book writing you tend to find that it is the individual genius of that individual writer who sits down, starts, finishes, and ends the book. and then argue with their editor or doesn't, depending upon the nature of the release. Where when it comes to role-playing writing, it's completely different, because often you're writing in a world that's not your own. Often you're writing in a world that's also developing in a variety of different ways, which means that when the text comes in, it may have been right to begin with, but by the time it comes closer to print, it may no longer be right, which means that words sometimes have to change completely outside the scope of what the author ever originally intended, or the authors. And it's not their fault. They've not done anything wrong. And it's also not the development's fault per se, depending on the situation at hand, meaning that the text is never quite certain once it leaves the author's hand. And sometimes it can end up being released quite different to what was pitched. So if you ever find yourself in a position where you're writing for a role-play game, just be aware that your hallowed words are not hallowed. They're quite different to, say, for example, in an authorial position, writing a piece of fiction, where you're far closer to, these are my words, and they don't shift. Where when it comes to roleplay, slightly different.
So flipped up, Righty Stream Stuff says I can just about do one thread, and Flip Top says they always try to do multi-threads now. Steve, what about you? Is it different being an author, novels versus the other work you do?
I would say that writing novels, etc., is the solo gig. Game writing is the closest I can equate to being in a writer's room on a TV show.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And the fact that you have maybe 13 talents. So, like, we have standard rules when I'm working on the computer game. Rule number 1, best idea wins. Literally, it doesn't matter whose it is, whichever's the best idea wins every time. Rule number 2, is it cool? Is the thing we're trying to do fun, exciting, interesting? If it isn't all of these, bin it. And I can talk about the mobile phone game at the moment. We've done 180 chapters, and we realized that stuff we'd done around chapter 90 was really going to fuck up what we wanted to do in chapter 200. So thankfully, because we were in closed beta, we went back and we utterly rewrote chapter 90 to 110, and literally nothing of that original writer's work survived. That was Graham. You know Graham, I think.
I do.
Yeah. So through no fault of Graham's, because it was excellent, we had to throw the whole thing away and recreate.
If I can interrupt for just a second, that's exactly what I was referring to when I said, if you're writing for role-playing games, you can never be certain that the words that you get through are going to be the words that get printed, because it's quite likely that, particularly if it's part of a longer campaign, the later parts of the campaign influence the earlier. You need to foreshadow things, or you need to ensure that certain things are set up. And that work is already done as far as the author's concerned, but when the book comes out, it's completely different. And they're like, where did my work go?
I just love the rest in peace Graham at the bottom.
Yeah, that comment. Yeah. Pro Graham.
Is that our Graham?
No,
different Graham. Okay.
But he lives in Edinburgh, so you will know him as well, I'm sure.
Okay.
It's but the idea of the writer's room, the fact that together we are greater than the sum of our parts. You know, whatever I can create that is unique and individually me and is all that wonderful, awesome that I was talking about before, if I'm working with 4 or 5 other writers, I can guarantee what we come up with will be just beyond what I would come up with by myself.
Yeah, agreed every time.
Because they see things in my stuff, I see things in their stuff, and we have that wonderful like riffing off each other, like, you know, jazz musicians or whatever, where you have an idea and you just go, oh, but what if? Or my favorite one, which is no, really, why? And no, really, why is my absolute favorite, because every time you say, oh, you know, well, such and such happens. Well, why? Well, because he's 5'7" and has a thing against dwarfs. It's like, no, really, why? And then you come up with another answer. And it's like, no, really, why? And you keep just chiseling away. No, what is the real truth, the secret, the one that's buried right at the bottom? because your brain has a habit of giving you an easy answer, but not the best answer. And if you keep, as a group, just chipping away and chipping away and chipping away, eventually you get to this nugget where you go, that's the one.
Yep, agree completely.
And is there an etiquette? I guess the etiquette varies right around being cut, depending on the work you're doing, what the work's for, etc.
Yes, there's an etiquette. The etiquette's quite simple in the roleplay game business. Whoever is running the game decides what the etiquette is.
Yeah,
it's as simple as that. Now, that might mean for some producers of a game that they're very accommodating and they constantly talk to their authors and they explain what's happened and they're cool. It might just mean that the work gets given to the producer goes, nope, gives it to someone else, gets something new, it goes to someone else, gets something new, and then it just goes out. Each game studio is quite different in how it applies the etiquettes involved. And if you're ever thinking of applying to one of these jobs, expect the worst. And hope for the best, because
next
particularly if you're being paid by the word.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Like that's a reality. You might write the however many words you're contracted for.
On that one, actually, if you're in the role playing industry, make sure that your contract doesn't say paid by the printed word. Make sure that you're actually getting paid by the word that you produced and submitted and had it accepted, because that's a bad one.
Next one. Do you have any tips for 1, writing good plot? 2,
I'm loving question 1.
Yeah, it does.
Well, can I leap in with number 2?
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, so I think Andy will know the story from Facebook and that. But look, I'm prolific. I write a lot. I'm full time. I write every day of the year. But 7 years ago. 7 years ago now.
Time flies.
Yeah, my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and 6 years ago he died. And after he died, I went through like an 8-month period where I couldn't write a word. Now the illusion was I was still being productive because I was 4 or 5 books ahead. So things were still coming out and being published, but I wasn't doing a thing. And I could sit, and it wasn't that I wasn't trying. I could sit at the computer and I could spend fucking 8 hours and do like 10 words. And it wasn't there. There was nothing. So I went on a quest to find a way to basically get rid of all the distractions that had come up around me because I was so fragmented. And the first thing I did was I bought a laptop that was about 10 years old. No internet, shit like that. I then put Linux on it. I then made it a Linux kiosk, so it only opened up in the beta version of Scrivener, and it couldn't do anything but that. And I did everything I could to remove the distractions, to remove the temptation to check the mobile phone, the temptation to flip a tab. And it was quite good, but the battery was shit because it was a 10-year-old computer. And I didn't really want to go and buy a new computer for that. So I found, I can't see it. No, it's in the drawers now. Right. So I found a company that was selling something they called the Hemming Write. And the idea of it was an old-fashioned typewriter with the proper big Cherry MX keys, the whole deal for typing on, but with a small e-ink screen.
Nice.
It's wired up to Dropbox and Google Drive, so you can sync your files to use on the computer, but nothing else. And the way it worked was you couldn't edit. You could only write forwards. And suddenly I'm sat there going, okay, I've got this new toy. I'll have a go. And I turned it on. And now bearing in mind, I genuinely hadn't written a thing. 15 minutes after I turned it on, maybe it was the new toy thing, maybe it was the uniqueness of it, but suddenly I had 300 words of a thing. And I'm like, okay, 15 minutes wasn't too painful. I'll try and do 15 minutes in the evening. And I did 15 minutes in the evening, and suddenly I had 600 words. And I thought, well, okay, maybe I'll do 15 minutes tomorrow morning as well, but with no pressure on myself. And in chunks of like 15 minutes, morning and night, for about 2 weeks, I suddenly found myself in a position where, from having done nothing, I'm getting on for 10,000 words. I'm like, okay, solid, absolutely, and with no effort to my life, no breaking of things. And like nowadays, I work on the iPad. I don't work on fancy computers and the big stuff. I've got the iPad with Scrivener on it, and it is brilliant. It's the perfect writing machine. And for me, a big part of beating writer's block was finding the tool that helped me fight away all the distractions that were destroying me. And I guess forgiving myself for this idea that I hadn't had an idea. So not even an original idea, but I hadn't had an idea for about 8 months. And I remember being on the plane flying back to England when I had my first idea in 8 months. This thing just popped in my head and I'm like, shit, I'm back. And it was just so exciting. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, genuinely, it was like, okay, I mean, how can I explain it? From the age of 18, 17, I've been agented and I've been writing professionally and selling. My entire identity has been predicated on, I am Steve, I write. Having 8 months when I couldn't write, then who am I? And if it's not going to come back, what if that's it? What if my mind is broken and grief has absolutely just crushed it? And say the Hemming Write, which became the Free Write, was it. It was the key that unlocked it. Now, I don't use it now. Have no need of it at all. But just for that instance of fighting to get myself back, I don't think I would have done it without it. And it's really weird. But it is that distraction is a killer. I mean, you look around, I can see way too much of my office compared to your offices in here. And my office is a mess compared to yours.
Oh, no, it's not.
Oh,
You
no,
can't
it's not.
see that bit over there. It's a bomb site.
Wide angle.
My room was one giant distraction. Camera angles are brilliant. They completely save your life from this sort of thing.
I think that must have been the most terrifying 7 or 8 months ever, Steve.
Yeah.
That sounds
It
just
sounds
like fear.
So I'm going to come back with a story that makes everyone's life look super easy. I mean, super hard by comparison. Never had writer's block in my life, ever. I am exceedingly lucky and privileged in that front. And my heart literally goes out to Steve for everything that he went through. I've got too much to do and too many ideas and too much stuff going around in my head, constantly flicking from one thing to another. The ideas and the block isn't the issue. For me, it has always been the finishing. Has always been the getting forward and getting it to the end. 90% easy, 100% and polished hard. And that's where I hit my blocks. My blocks are always the worrying over the final details to make sure it's right. And if I was going to suggest anything, just get the stuff down on screen. Mm-hmm. If you're looking for the first part of the question, which was how can you write better plots? Planning, I've said this before in other streams, planning does everything, but in the end, the writing process is always going to a degree, overwrite your plan. And finishing whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's the chapter, whether it's the next 300 words, whether it's the next 50 words, just making sure you make those chunks and hit an end, because once you've finished, it's very easy to then go back and see what you've done wrong, twist it, change it, modify an NPC, modify a character, so to make sure that you get what you hope to be your next piece of genius work. I'll take from that angle instead. You want to go, Andy?
Can I leave in for a second?
Oh yeah. Quickly.
I just wanted to say there, when you're talking about how to write better plot, if you're starting, if it's your first stuff, it's a really daunting thing. Now, when I started, the first thing I did was I went to the library and I borrowed a bunch of books. I borrowed J.N. Williamson's How to Write Science Fiction. I borrowed William Nolan's How to Write Horror. And I read these I read how to write thrillers for the construction of it and how it physically is put together. And then I took 3 very successful books. I took Dean Koontz's Lightning. I took it was a Robert Ludlum thriller, and it was I can't remember the science fiction novel, but I then basically ripped them apart. I worked out, okay, so this section, this happens, he builds the character up like this, he's going here. How does he do it in the science fiction novel? Oh, well, look, it's very similar how he does it in the science fiction novel to the thriller novel. And I created a chart. And I had the 3 books and the structures right the way through, working out the plots that they had, working out how they constructed it, working out where they hit the notes and go, this is where they give us the first clue of how it's going to end. This is where they do this. And found that actually with a lot of these successful books, there's an awful lot of formula. Yeah. And then, of course, I discover things like Save the Cat. And you'll see, if you're starting writing now, you'll see the Save the Cat formula in everything. In the same way that when I was starting, you saw the hero's journey thing, the Hero 1,000 Faces, in everything you watched from Star Wars on. You can learn this stuff. Literally, it's a skill. It's not something that is just there and you go, I have solved it. You can literally learn how to plot. To go, okay, I want to go from A to B to C. I want to know how to make it interesting. Where do I need to have the thing that throws you to make you think you're not going to get there? You think of every rom-com you've ever seen. You always know they're going to have the breakup moment before the hero get back together at the end. And all of this, it's all formulaic. So there's a reason. It's because we like stories that hit the notes that we expect.
It's like my life drawing thing, Steve, just to point out why that was right. You have to know the rules before you can break the rules, because if you just jump straight to breaking the rules, you don't know what you're breaking, you don't know why it works. Like the hero's journey, is it Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I was at the V&A, the Design Museum in Dundee, at the video game exhibition, and I think it was The Last of Us. I can't remember, but the exhibition was all about the creation of games, and they literally had the hero's journey with post-its, and they had just plotted it. And yeah, it's a valid way to do it, just with post-its and move them around and say, I know I want that scene to happen, but would that scene happen better here rather than there?
And that's quite why Save the Cat's become such a thing at the moment, and it's in every freaking film. If you read the Save the Cat formula, you'll realize everything being done now is being done on the Save the Cat formula. It's dominating, and it's in the. Lindsay was talking about going to bookshops, looking at
for Norwegian
and Scandinavian fiction before we started. There's a Swedish writer, a guy called Henning Mankell, who taught a course in Stockholm to crime writers. There's a reason every Scandinavian noir novel feels the same. Every single one of these people, from Lekberg and on, all of them attended his course. And they all follow the pattern he taught them, because these patterns work.
It's like Swedish pop music.
So for the person
every
who wants
boy or
to
girl
pop,
band gets sent to Sweden for their pop music intensive. It's a true fact.
It's true. There's a really good documentary about that on Netflix, actually.
Oh, is there?
A couple of weeks ago.
I didn't know it was really true.
It is a real thing. Yeah. It is. Yeah.
I do want to get to this one. So,
Andy had his point.
Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
I'll keep mine very brief. Obviously, at I guess at a lower and smaller level, that's what a lot of my day job is getting kids to kind of do creative writing and write stories and things. And it's fascinating because the youngest kids that I teach, they all feel like they're writers. They all just sit down and they come up with stuff, and some of it's great and some of it's not, but they all do it. And then as they get older, they doubt themselves and second guess themselves, and they lose that, and they no longer think of themselves as writers. And I think the same is true when it comes to drawing and art and various other skills as well. So a lot of what I'm doing is trying to get kids to rekindle that self-belief. And particularly when it comes to exam years and they're needing to do it to a particular criteria that's going to get them marks, then again, that kind of teaching them a much simpler version of that kind of formula. I do a thing sometimes with, so I do like story roulette, I call it, and we have like a bunch of random things. So you randomize a profession, and you randomize a location, and you randomize a prop, and you randomize an emotion. And then we do that together, and we come up with a story that will use all of that. And then they all do that themselves, and come up and write a little story. And half the time it is just a way of saying, get the words on the page. Like, it's just getting them started. And once they start, they can follow a very simple formula and make something work. When it comes to role-playing plots and kind of what works there, I mean, it's obviously there's a whole manner of complexity around, the genre you're playing in and the world you're playing in and all that kind of stuff. But I think, like, for me, there's two main principles I always keep coming back to. The first one is like, what is the why, right? Like what's the point of the story? Is there some fundamental human truth that lies at the heart of it, right? Whether it's something trite like love conquers all or whatever, that there's some kind of core thematic central point, a reason why you're telling this story. And then the other side of it is, what are the choices and dilemmas along the way? Because obviously it's an interactive story, so you're not just telling them what happens and plotting out the outcome you want. You're having to give the players opportunities to forge their own story. And what you want it to be is you don't want it to be obvious. So if every choice is really obvious that they're always going to pick that, then actually that's unsatisfying for the players. You want to put them in dilemmas where they feel bad and they have to either do something bad for a greater good, or allow something bad to happen for a greater good, or face the choice between putting themselves at risk and losing something they want in order to do the morally right thing. And building
those PCs.
Yeah, well, exactly. Building those choices in, but at the heart, if you manage it well, when it works really well, the players will end up being driven towards one or the other of the choices, but only because not because you've railroaded them, but because you have told a story that thematically resonates in such a point that when they come to that climatic moment, it all gels and it all comes together. I don't know if I've articulated that well or not, but that's what I love in games I've played, and that's what I aspire to in the things I write.
There's one here I want to get to. I did have another one up, but this one is actual advice for someone who's in a situation, so I want to get to it. So UK6SM says, my wife is writing a book based on her PhD, so not fiction, and her publisher is pushing her in a direction she's not fully comfortable with. How much do you think a first-time author can push back, if at all?
Right. Real business speak for a moment. It's her name on the book. In 3 months, it'll be off the publisher's desk and they'll never think about it again. For the rest of her life, it'll be on her bookshelf. If she is desperately unhappy because she's been railroaded into a position that isn't her thing, it isn't what she wants, then she has to live with it forever.
Yep.
So do you reckon it's worth pushing back? I would say, yeah, it's worth pushing back. Now, you therefore have to be prepared to walk away. And you make a decision with yourself. How much do I want it? How much do I want to be compromised? Personally, I stopped working for Games Workshop on book 4 of the Warhammer one because I had such a horrible experience. And there's only an element of how far I can push back, and the easiest thing is leave. So I just left. And you want to be proud of what you're looking at on the shelf. You don't want to be sat there thinking, oh, I wish that I'd fought harder for what I believe in. Tim Powers tells a nice little 2-line story, basically. He turned around to me because I was saying, look, I'm having some issues with one of the things I'm doing. And he's like, Steve, when you die and you go up and you see St. Peter at the gates of heaven, St. Peter is not going to say to you, Steve, why couldn't you be more like Michael Moorcock? He's going to say, Steve, why weren't you yourself? There's only one of you. And that's something that's pretty much stuck with me for getting on for 25 years since he said it. It's like, yes, hundreds of people can write Michael Moorcock pastiches if they want to. Only one person can write a Steve Savile original.
Amen.
So
I think, yeah, totally with you, Steve, especially if it's based on her PhD.
Yeah,
She's
this
the
is it.
expert in
It's her
that. She
thing.
knows it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's her thing. And the publisher have contracted her for a reason. So she needs to actually say, look, I will defend my choices. You can tell me what you want as your edits and stuff. I will listen. I won't necessarily do. I will take on what I think works. I will ignore what doesn't work. And yeah, I will push back.
Yep,
Totally.
agreed completely.
So we've got like a few more questions to get through. So
Let's
try
do
to
these
keep
ones
it
quickly.
when
Let's
writing-
go. Rapid fire. Okay, rapid fire. I'm ready.
When writing for an established IP, how do you keep
Yes.
up your enthusiasm with restrictions or writing known characters you personally don't like? Heinrich Todbrenner.
Oh, I like that one. How do I keep my enthusiasm up? By working on IPs that I love. I've always been in a lucky position where I've been able to choose my jobs. So that's how I keep up. Now, if I was working for somebody else's IP on something that I didn't enjoy, I'd be questioning why I'm doing it in the first place. I keep my enthusiasm up because I don't think there is a character I don't like. Every character has got their characters for a reason. And if there's something about them I don't like there's something in their past that I didn't think was very well written or it wasn't very well realized, well, I've now got an opportunity where I can take that and turn it into something that does make sense and does work. So for me, that's it.
I think it's the same way that I try to empathize with other people and not necessarily agree with them ever and not necessarily want to go to the pub with them. But I always say to myself, everyone's the hero in their own story. And that really helps you understand people's motivations. And in terms of a character you don't like, if you think of it from that perspective, it can be really useful because people don't do things to be evil. They do things because they think they're the hero in their own story.
Yeah.
And so
Speed
if you
it
can
up.
think about
We've
it,
got answers to get to.
Sorry.
And like for me, like much like Annie, like no problem at all with characters I don't like. I did have the issue in Uberstrike, for instance, where I've never been particularly enthused by Warhammer dwarfs. I don't hate them, but they're just they're not my thing. And there's a whole dwarf quarter, and I had to to write that. And a lot of the way I did that was very similar, but at a larger level, was think, well, what are the stories I can tell that I want to tell within that, and then it almost became. And by the end of it, I really loved it, and I really loved dwarfs. And so
The way it works.
Fliptop says just run longer. Does anyone have an urgent appointment at 8 o'clock?
Nope, I'm good. Like I said, I can sit here for hours.
We're not
Great
doing
news.
that.
Yeah.
Just to be, so we're clear. Right,
Yeah.
so
So
do we have
what
any other
about you,
questions
Steve?
sitting? Oh,
Well,
no, we have questions.
I was going to say I had the odd experience of working on something that I loved, but being given the dreaded opening line of "We want you to reimagine it."
Sorry.
Yeah. So now I'm an English boy of a certain age. I grew up reading 2000 AD. I loved Slain. I thought the comics were fantastic. I get hired by Games Workshop to write 3 Slain novels, but they want me not to write the story from the comics, not to use his background from the comics, and reimagine him as a character. I mean, it's fucking minefield, and it's a nightmare. And little did I know. Little did I know at this point that they had they talked to Pat Mills. Pat Mills wanted to write it, and they rejected Pat, and he's the guy who created the fucking thing. So not only was I asked to reimagine it, I was asked to reimagine it when the guy who created it had just been refused writing it. So as you can imagine, when word drifted out that this was going to happen, the response on the internet was pretty fucking brutal.
Not surprisingly.
Yeah. I mean, I had people at one point, they hacked my website. They put up pictures of Jimmy Savile on it. They hid my book. Yeah, they hid my books in the gay and lesbian section in Waterstones. They thought that was clever. I'm like, okay. They threatened to come to a book signing and slash my face with a knife. They basically made life utterly miserable and stole any ounce of joy I had from doing the thing. And then I still had 2 books to go.
Yay!
Yeah. And you want to talk about how do you summon up the energy and enthusiasm to go back into that? And the truth is, halfway through the second one, I wrote to my agent and I wrote, get me out of this fucking contract. Because I am going out of my mind. I can't do this. I hate sitting here. I want to burn the whole thing down. I am so pissed off at what they've done to me. Yeah. And literally the lucky thing, okay, I can't see anything that says any Games Workshop people are here. They're so disorganized, the license expired.
Oh, well, that's that one finished then. What's the next question? Just to finish that one off.
Is word count an actual... Is word count an actual issue when writing adventures, campaigns, and settings?
Yes, and yes, always. Word count is, particularly when you're working for printed books in the role-playing industry, it's a gold standard you do not pass. If you've got yourself an 80k job, part of being a professional writer is hitting 80k. And ensuring that 80k that you've hit is not filler, it's not just spread out so you reach it, and also isn't spread out and suddenly tight at the end or any equivalent. Word count is sacrosanct, particularly given if you've got a book that's 144 pages long, say, you can't just add an extra 16 pages on without changing your costs. And in the role-playing industry, there are much tighter budgets because it's not a big industry. So, yes.
Only here to support Steve due to his chronic shyness and unwillingness to speak. Yeah, it's very Steve, because the 2 Andys have a real problem with that as well.
It's
so
true. It's true.
It's a perennial issue.
This is my friend from Glasgow who has turned up.
Yay.
Yay! Do we have any more?
We do have one more. It's from the redoubtable Sea Goat. Any tips or suggestions for finishing off stories, plots, etc., which doesn't feel meh? And he's elaborated, I can write stories and build words, but finishing off the stories in a meaningful manner always feels meh.
Right. The answer to your end is in your beginning. All right? Whenever you're stuck and you're feeling that your end doesn't have punch, doesn't have power, isn't resonating, or doesn't make sense, go back to the beginning and read your opening 5 pages, 10 pages of your thing. Because the secret, it's buried in there. Your end and your beginning need to be linked in some way to have a meaningful payoff. So you feel, yes, that contentment that comes with it. So every single time at the end, when you're trying to find what your end is, if you're like, let's say meh, it just feels go back and look at what you were trying when you started, because that's where the end, that's where your secret to your end is. It's in the beginning, that lovely loop that closes the circle and says, yes, this story is now complete.
Okay, if I can just very briefly just speak directly to that. So one of the writing sort of scaffolds that I do with my students when I'm trying to get them to write effective short fiction, and it works on a bigger scale as well, is exactly that, but like literally using the same line. So your first line and your last line of the story is exactly the same, but it means something different at the end. Yeah. And it's a thing, you show them a couple of examples and then you can set relatively young kids off doing it, and they're producing good stories because just that task of coming up with it's absolutely linked, but you're seeing it in a different light now, inherently means you've made a good story. So yeah, sorry, back to you, Steve.
No, it's fine. Yeah, I keep reading the messages.
It's part of the fun of it.
It is. And the thing is, there's a story from way before I want to tell, and I'm like, I'll get to it. Longer, man.
So I'm going to go with a slightly different tack because Steve has actually said almost exactly what I would have gone with. Take a look at the story you were going to tell, and you can almost certainly find it at the beginning. I'm going to say, if you're wanting to get towards your end and you're finding it difficult, since we're loosely discussing me saying that I found it's sometimes tough to get over that 90% barrier at the end. My only tip to that is buckle up and write something. Because then it's much easier to take a deep breath, have a walk, come back, look at it, and then do exactly what Steve suggested, for example. Have a quick read through of parts of it, see where it doesn't work. And then because you've got something there, you've got something you can fine polish and you can hone. And even if what you're writing is bad, it's not bad, because what you're doing is you're laying down the foundations for the house that you're going to finish. And sometimes those foundations are going to start off very weak, but at least it's finished. And finishing your work is the big step, because then you can polish it and turn it into something beautiful.
And be used to the idea that when you get to about 80%, 90% of the way in, your brain is starting to feed you other shit, other stories,
and to rebel,
other things. And it's been like the next project, the exciting thing you want to be on. And you actually literally have to learn to shut that off and stay, you know, what's the Star Wars one? You know, stay on target.
Stay on target.
Stay on target.
Stay on target. But it's natural. Your brain does this. I mean, literally, I was talking about it on Twitter. I've just written 20,000 words in a week from an idea that popped up into my head and just screamed when I was about 10 days from finishing the last novel. It just literally, this idea went, I have to be told. And I'm like, no, you fucking don't. And I just literally, I wrote down like 6 notes, dink, 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 and put it to the side. And the minute I finished the thing, I then went, okay, now I can do this. And it's just poured out like that. But you have to get really disciplined to ignore the shit your brain is feeding you.
Yep. 100% agreement from me in that
one.
one.
Interesting one here from Roderick. I reckon if you play tested the session a few times, this is talking about endings for a roleplay adventure, you might be able to write more satisfying endings by just outlining what the players did in the playtest plus one other option. And
good cheat.
Which I thought was quite interesting, actually. An interesting thing to think about. And they've come back and said that in one published adventure, I just included playtest boxes that told the reader what the playtest had done, so the GM knew what other players had done. Good idea.
That's a nice idea.
It's interesting, like for me, like hearing all this, and it might explain, Andy, why you and I work so well together. Because I kind of have the opposite problem. In that I always start with the ending. Like I always very much with the role playing in particular, I always have what the climax is going to be and what the denouement's going to be, like that. And then I'm like, right, how do I get there? My problem is often starting. How do I get the players in and hooked in a way that isn't a cliche and isn't obvious? And that's why quite often, like Andy will know, I quite often pick his brains a lot at that point, as well as for the broader structural stuff. So
that's why being in a team is really good. And particularly for adventure writing, just as a small part to finish that one off on. Having a team working on multi-threaded plots, for example, makes an enormous difference, particularly for tying them back together neatly. If you are ever on a project like we are at the moment where you've got a team, you can really rely on each other's strengths and weaknesses to patch each other and scaffold each other to make sure that you do get something that works for the end. Just worth saying, teams are great. I love teams.
Yeah, and that idea of playtesting novels. So again, interestingly, that's another thing I sometimes do in my students. Not exactly that, but I encourage them to essentially have like algorithmic thinking when it comes to their ending. If they're not quite sure, there's just a series of choices, right? Does this happen or that happen? If that happens, does this happen or that happen? Does this happen or that happen? And as soon as they do that, they take it away and they're like, oh, all right, actually, I don't have infinite possibilities. At any given point, I've got 2 choices, and it becomes manageable again for them.
Yeah, George R.R. Martin, we're looking at you. The last book didn't feel too well to do with TPG.
This is the story I want to tell. Can I tell this story quite quickly?
You have got a minute and a half.
Right, okay. So
I'm timing you.
Pre-1999, I'm in the Bantam Spectra offices in America with Angrol, his editor. Half of the Clash of Kings is on the desk, has just been delivered. Gets a phone call while I'm in the office, it's George in a complete panic because somebody on his forum has guessed the entire plot of Game of Thrones, and they've printed it on his forum. So his response is, holy shit, I can't write the story I was going to write because they'll say I've just stolen their story. Now his editor, Anne, says, don't be stupid, everyone will forget. Carry on and do it. But I think one of the biggest problems with that is from that moment, George always had it in his head that the answer to everything was on his forum, was on his website, written by somebody else, and he would always be accused of stealing from them. So I think he then had to throw away everything he planned and rebuild stuff.
That would explain a lot.
I mean, it would, wouldn't it? Yeah, totally. So, yeah, well, that was fun. That was cool.
That was good. Good chat.
Thanks, Steve.
Excellent.
You're
So,
right.
Before we finish up, we've got something to announce.
Oh,
for
yes,
patrons.
for our
Don't
patrons,
forget,
don't
Andy.
we? We don't want to forget that, do we? So, for all of you who are patrons already, we've got ourselves a new funky little emoji, which is popping up on the... great discussion. Thank you very much. A new emoji that's popping up in Discord, which you will gain access to, the early bird. If you want to go see it, when we come off of this call, I'm going to go activate it for everyone. Some people already have it, those sneaky little top-level backery people. So anyone who backs our Patreon for the next month will get access to that. We'll have it permanently, forever. And that will only for the next month. After that, anyone who pops on won't, because it's an early bird special. That was Mark. Mark's the best. He was like, I'm going to paint an early bird. So Mark Gibbons has painted us a gorgeous little emoji, which you really want to get your hands on because it's super, super cool. So yes, that's that. That's what we have to say. It's a lovely little bit for the patron packers, pardon me. Looking lovely. So anything else?
Sorry, I put myself on mute randomly.
Well done.
No, nothing else apart from for Patreons. Thank you very much for everyone who signed up. Look out in the credits for everyone who has joined this week.
Absolutely. Because you're all going to get your name up this week. How lovely is that?
Excellent.
Flip Top's got a lovely little comment there, which should be brought up.
Yep. And if you have Discord Nitro, you'll be able to use the early bird on other Discords too. Well,
Your own special piece of Mark Gibbons artwork. Oh,
and
lovely.
Zoltan, the Golden Rook, can confirm.
Indeed, the Golden Rook. And thanks, Steve. You're the best.
It's been a pleasure, mate.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back, Steve. Julia Statia says, always a great time listening to you all, hoping for more general writing theme streams. We will look into that.
We have
whenever. Just yell. That's it.
Brilliant. And if we get to £500, we're going to do a series of podcasts, and some of them would definitely be chats with authors, wouldn't they, Andy?
Absolutely would. And although I'm not sure that Steve will have much to say.
I'm sure we can squeeze a word or two out of him.
So thank you all for joining me.
Back. That's the one.
Hashtag bring Steve back. Enjoy
it.
the rest of your Saturday wherever you are, and we will see you again next week for Inside the Rookery.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.